Yo, what's going on, guys, and welcome back. Today we're actually covering Active Directory basics. So before we dive into this, guys, we're almost to 5K. Hit that sub button, help me out a little bit. We're so close. I wanted to get it by the end of the year. Hopefully we still can. Let's go ahead and dive into it. So first off, guys, this is probably one of the most important boxes you'll ever do, and I'll explain why. So you hear me talk about it all the time, that there is basically an issue with people going like from college or getting a bunch of certs and then expecting a job in cybersecurity, right? This is something that we talk about a lot. People always say, well, I got this cert and I got this degree, I should be able to get a job. Like, why can't I get a job? Well, the problem is you're trying to jump tiers, right? So you're expected to work help desk, system administration, network administration, things like that. The reason for it is because of this box right here, Active Directory Basics. Now, there's other reasons, but this is the main experience that you miss out if you jump that tier, if you skip. You don't understand Active Directory because this is the basics, but we're going to do this module and we're going to dive into it deep as we progress. So let's go ahead and look at it. So what is Active Directory, right? And here it talks about it. It's the backbone of the corporate world. Exactly. And not just corporate, military, everybody. It's government. Anybody that has a large network almost exclusively uses Active Directory. Now, some people might say, well, a lot of companies use cloud-based. Guess what? They're using Azure Active Directory or something else. There's some centralized brain to it, and this is what they are. So let's go ahead and hop into it. So the Windows domain, right? So this is a good example. You picture yourself, you have a small business, you got 5 computers, okay? You've got these 5 computers. Well, cool. Think about your own personal computer right now. You get on, you log on, right? That log on that you use on your computer at home, it's not going to work at your neighbor's computer, right? That account doesn't match their computer. So when you have this small company with 5 computers, you log into one, you can't log into the other, right? Because unless you create an account on that computer. Those are what's called local accounts. So with 5 computers, yeah, you could probably just make 5 accounts and be done with it and be pretty easy, right? That wouldn't be bad. But what happens when now you have 157 computers and 320 different users? Well, you can't just make you can't take 320 users and make a local account on every single machine if you have 160 computers. It's just too difficult to manage, right? So to overcome that, we have Active Directory, okay? And this is what it would look like. So here's your domain, tryhackme.com is the domain they're using. Here's your domain controller. It's in the middle. It's your brains, right? It can allow you to have one single logon, and you can control everything on that from simple one machine. So I can log into all these machines if I have access with my one account, and I don't have to do anything, right? My account works here, it works here, it works here, it works here, it works here. And if anybody that's ever worked in an actual anywhere really has probably seen this, where they've been able to log on all the computers, or the company sends you a computer and you can log on using your new account and stuff like that. Those accounts are all managed in Active Directory along with the permissions that the machine has. So that's the security policies we're going to talk about. So real world example, sounds a bit confusing. Chances are that you've already interacted with the Windows domain at your point. Exactly what I just said. At some point with school, work, whatever, you've probably done this and never realized it. So you've logged in. So what they're showing us here is, welcome to Tryhackme Incorporated. During this task, we'll assume the role of a new IT admin, okay? Be sure to click the Start Machine button. Use the same machine for all tasks. This should open up in your browser. So here is our machine. Eventually. Now, I'll tell you, this is an extremely slow machine, and that's because they have a domain controller running on it, and they probably don't have hardly any RAM on it. So in a Windows domain, credentials are stored in a central repository called Active Directory. So what does that mean? Active Directory is what we're talking about. The reason they specify that is because that is right here. The main idea behind a domain controller is centralized administration, blah, blah, blah. A Windows computer network is a single repository called Active Directory, okay? The server that runs Active Directory is called a domain controller. The reason that's important is because they're almost used interchangeably, but people will often say domain controller, and you might say, I don't know what that is. It's just Active Directory. It's the server running Active Directory. So you'll see, especially in a lot of corporate environments and things like that, you'll see like naming convention, the server might be called DC01 or DC02. It's because that server is called a domain controller. What's running on it is Active Directory. All right, so let's dive into Active Directory. So the core of any Windows is Active Directory domain services. This is just what we'll show here, and we'll pull it up here. We'll say Active. And another thing you might hear this called a lot, Active Directory users and computers. Look at the acronym ADUC. A lot of people call this ADUC, okay? Because Active Directory does a lot of other things besides just manage users and computers, and we're covering some of those. So if someone refers to ADUC, if you hear that, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about the users and computers. They're not talking about the group policies, any of that stuff, the DNS. Now, I mentioned DNS here. They're not going to mention it here because it's not in Active Directory. You do not have to run your DNS server on Active Directory. You don't. You can run it anywhere you want. A lot of people run their DNS server on their domain controller. Just know that. A lot of people do that. So here you've got what they call group, or here we go. I'm trying to make sure we follow what they're saying here. So yeah, so they're just talking about it as objects, right? So objects are users, computers. You can see here they have computers here. They have Tryhackme. This is the domain that we're using, and you can see it says tryhackme.local. So at the beginning they actually named it tryhackme.com or something. It's going to be thm.local. That's the domain we're currently using in this scenario. And you can see here they have an IT department, a management department, marketing, research and development, sales, and then they have users inside each one. You see that? So they have Christine, Robert, Sophia, Thomas. They are all in the sales department. Well, they also have computers in here, and they are managed differently, right? A computer in a certain organizational unit, OU, might be managed differently than one over in HR. For instance, it might have access to different shares, or it might have access to a server that a computer over here doesn't have access. That's what's all managed in here. So you have users. These are your objects. So if you ever hear something called an object in Active Directory, it can be anything. So it's users. These are people, services. Now, when they talk about people, that's Christine, Robert, Sophie, Thomas. Those are people. When they talk about services, they're talking about the account that is used to run a service. Those are called service accounts. Those services have to have some sort of account to talk to each other, right? These are called service accounts. They usually are rotated passwords, just like regular person. So just know that there's a difference between services and people. Then you have machines. These are your computers, your servers, all that stuff. They don't show it here, but usually, and then you have your domain controllers. That's a machine, but usually you'll see like a OU here for servers, workstations, stuff like that, and that's where you manage those. Now, you can see security groups. So this is by default what they're talking about. So by the way, this is one of the questions. So identifying machine accounts is relatively easy. These are accounts that are automatically generated local accounts for the machine. And you can see it's going to have the same name as the machine with a $sign. That's the account. They will have passwords. So you can get that password and log into the machine technically. But you can see they're generally comprised of 120 random characters. I will tell you, most people don't use these accounts. What they do is they make a local admin account. So what that means is when I'm actually creating when I'm creating the image, so when I design an image that I'm going to then pass out to every workstation, meaning I have one hard drive, it's got my golden image, it's how I want all my computers to run for everybody that I pass one out to. I clone that hard drive and I do what's called sysprep. Don't worry about that. And then you have those hard drives, right? And then you just give everyone that, basically that computer. And when you do that, it has a local admin account on it. That local admin account is something that only the administrators will have access to, but it allows, if you do lock yourself out of that computer, if there is no way in, they can get into it with that local admin account. So that, keep in mind, that is not what they're talking about here. So if you hear of local accounts, this is different. This is a machine account, and it's not very much in use necessarily, but it is, if you ever need to get into it, you can. Okay, so now we're talking about security groups. So security groups, these are the default groups, meaning this is going to come with your domain controller. You can add, delete, manage, whatever, change anything you want. But you have your domain admins. This is pretty self-explanatory. They're admins of all the domain. They can access everything. Then you have your server operators. Using this group can administer domain controllers. They cannot change administrative group permissions. So what's that mean? They can actually change things on the domain controller that's necessary to administer it, update it, run scripts, that type of stuff. But they cannot change administrative group permissions, meaning they can't go in here and start changing who has permission to what, because these are people that are just managing the server. They're not actually working on the permissions and stuff. Then you have backup operators. This is users in this group are allowed to access any files, ignoring their permissions. They're used to perform backups. So what does that mean? It means, hey, we got to take up backups of this domain controller. And the reason people take backups is in case something ever happens, they can just restore it. Well, that person, if they don't have access to every single file on the domain controller, they're going to get errors when they're trying to back it up, right? This allows them to ignore that and go ahead and do the backups. Now, account operators, users in this group can modify other accounts in the domain. So I could go to Christine. I could say, hey, I want to change her password. I want to give her access to something else, blah, blah, blah. Domain users. This is everybody that's just got an account in the domain. You're a domain user. You're using the domain. Now, domain computers. This is every computer in the machine or in the domain. And then domain controllers. This is the actual Active Directory server. So Active Directory users and computers were here. Okay. And then you can see, feel free to right click the Tryhackme OU and create a new OU under it called students. So what they're saying is we could actually go into here and we could create a new OU if we wanted. And we could say, we want a new organizational unit, and we want it to be called students. And it doesn't really matter, but you can see now it's here. So now we have IT, management, marketing, research, sales, and students. So they're just showing you that you can do that. Now, you could, like they said, if you open any of them, you can see that they have people in them. So that's fine. And then you can probably notice that there are already default containers apart from them, which is the built-in computers, blah, blah, blah. These containers are created by Windows automatically and contain the following. So this is basically a just default domain controller. They haven't changed much on it. They've added a couple of things like management, marketing with a few accounts, but usually you're talking, you open one of these OUs, there might be hundreds or thousands of people in this, not just 3 or 4. So let's go through them. So the built-in, which is up here, contains default groups available to any Windows host. So what's that mean? These are default. So if you don't know what you're doing, if you're kind of like, hey, I'm not sure how to do this, and you're a new admin, these are your best friend because these are default, meaning they've come together. They said these are what a standard organization might use. You can use them. Then computers, any machine joining the network will be held here. So this is, let's say you get a new computer. It's never been on the domain before, meaning it's never actually connected to the network. You connect to the network and you log in with your domain credentials, right? Well, now it's going to join the domain. Those are going to go in here until somebody moves them. The point of this is if something new joins, you can make that have very little permissions until you get that computer where it needs to be, whether it's in HR, whether it's in marketing, whether it's in sales, whatever. Now, domain controllers, this is all your permissions for your basic domain controller. So that one, most people won't be touching that. Users, default users and groups that apply to a wide context. So this is all of your users. You can see right here. And this is, again, your security groups and stuff that you can use. And you can see they have guests. They have all kinds of different things, all different accounts that you can use. Enterprise admins, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are security groups, and then these are 2 users. So you could tell the groups versus the users, but you can see that under Tryhackme, they created a new OU for Tryhackme that's going to manage all their stuff. So they left all the default, but you can see they created new, and that's usually best practice. Leave the default in case you need to reference it or take some stuff from it, but create your own. So which group normally administrates all computers? If you remember, that's domain admin. They have access to everything on the domain. Then what would the name of the machine be with Tom PC? And you remember, it's just the Tom PC with a $sign. It's just the name with a $sign. That's the machine account. Suppose our company creates a new department for quality assurance. So in here, we have IT, management, marketing, research, development, sales. We need a quality assurance. What type of container should we use to group all quality assurance users so that policies can be applied? That's an OU, organizational unit. All right. So this is a lot of information, but what does any of it mean to you? We're gonna dive into it. So first things first, they said, hey, here's your org chart. Okay, so this is how it relates to the business. Okay, this is why it's very important to kind of put this picture together for you, because this is how things are managed. So Daniel's the general manager. Okay, well, we have management here. There's Daniel. He's the general manager. He actually has, if you go to properties and you look, well, of course, we'll go here and we'll look at his account and see what he has permissions for. And you can see, okay, so he doesn't actually have permissions. Normally he'd have special permissions because he's a manager. Here they haven't set all that up. That's fine. But usually if you have a general manager, they might have permissions to manage the people underneath them in whatever case that might be. They might have access to specific drives that somebody else doesn't have. Like, for instance, there's might be a management drive where they store all their HR information for their users, stuff like that. All that stuff he would have access to, but this management OU would have access to it. IT, marketing, research, all of them would not have access to it. Now, now you're starting to see why we create OUs versus giving them individually to a user, because if we have 200 managers in here, I'd have to go to each one and assign them that role, or that permission. Here, I can go in here and I can just delegate them control right now and assign them information or assign them permissions in there, and I don't have to manage them individually. I can do that all in one OU. And then the nice thing is, if someone gets promoted to a manager, let's say they were marketing before, let's say Mark got promoted to manager, I just take Mark and I move him into management, and now he has access to all of the stuff that manager should have access to. So you're seeing why it's beneficial to do it this way. So then we go into marketing. We saw that that Mark was in there. Sales, if we go into sales, we can see, okay, so we have Thomas, Sophie, and then we have Robert and Christine. So you can see that they're telling us we should be matching our Active Directory with this, right? So there's a couple people here that probably haven't gotten, that probably don't work here anymore or whatever, and they still are in here that actively. That's a problem. So first thing we would do is disable this account. Now I'll tell you, some people would say delete it. I don't delete it because I don't know what's going on yet, right? Maybe Christine was an important person. I need to access her stuff still. So I don't delete it. I disable it, meaning they cannot log in now, but I can still, if I need to, restore that account and get in there just in case I need to. So now deleting extra OUs. So you can see here, they're saying that research and development, because it's no longer exists, we need to delete it. Well, if we try and delete it, you'll see we'll get an error. So what we need to do is we need to go over here and go to, there it is, advanced features. And you notice it opened a bunch more stuff. That's fine. But now when we go in here and we go to research and development, when we go to properties, you'll see we actually have this protect object. Hopefully you guys can see that, protect object from accidental deletion. We need to disable that because it won't let you delete it if you don't. And the point of that is so that you don't accidentally delete something, because if this had 500 people in it and you delete it, even on accident, it's a big deal. So we say, yes, let's go ahead and delete it. Boom, there we go. Now we don't have research and development anymore. So now we're going to go to delegation. This is one thing I mentioned earlier. So one of the most common uses is for granting IT support the privilege. So what they're talking about here specifically is help desk. So help desk has permissions to change your passwords and stuff like that. So how can they do that? Here's how they do it. So without giving them too much. So we go to sales. We say delegate control. Okay. So we want to add a user. So here, let's say Philip is our only help desk guy because this is a small company. Remember that. Now you check the name. There it is, Philip at THM Local. Hit OK. Hit next. And then here, what do we want him to be able to do to this OU? Well, we want him to reset user password and force password changes. That's all we want him to do. We hit next. We hit finish. And boom, that's all he can do now. But Philip can do that to the sales department. That's all he can do it to. Now, what you would do here is you would actually give sales delegate control, and you'd give it to a large group of people. And you wouldn't individually put them in there. You'd put a security group in there, and then everyone with that security group can now do that. The point of that is help desk for a large company. You might have 200 people on help desk, let's just say. You don't want to individually go to each one because you might have people quitting, getting hired, at least 5-6 times a year, and you don't want to have to keep changing that. So now it wants us to go ahead and log in as Philip. So we'll go to our attack box. So we'll go in as Philip. I got the wrong IP. (148.69). All right. So now we're Philip. We'll log in as Philip, and they gave us his password here. And his password is Claire 2008. So now we log in, and it's going to tell you if you try to open up Active Directory users and computers, ADUC, you won't get permission. You don't have permission to open it. So he doesn't have permission to open it, but that's okay, because what we can do is we can run this command: set AD account password Sophie, because that's who we want to change. Reset new password. And then this is just a little prompt that pops up so that you don't see it. I'll say prompt new password, and then verbose so that we see it. So you can see it's going to ask me what's the new password. I'm just going to put password 123, hit enter, and then it will actually go and change it. So he had permission to change it. And you can see here's the target: common name, OU, sales, OU, Tryhackme, domain controllers, Tryhackme, local. So you can see it's telling us, hey, it worked. The password has been changed. So now we can actually go ahead, since we did change the password, and we can sign out. We can do the same thing, but this time we're going to log in as Sophie because we have her password, right? And this is just to prove that it worked. And here we logged in, so the password worked. We didn't know Sophie's password before. And then here's the flag: thank you for contacting support, or thanks for contacting support. So that's how that works. Now, that when I say that's how it works, that's how the permissions work. We gave him delegation on that OU, meaning we gave him access to actually go to that OU and change the password. That's what he could do, and he did it. So now the process of granting privileges to a user over some OU or other object is delegation, which we just did because it's under sales. So let's go to the next one. All right. By default, the machines that join domain, except for the domain controllers, will be put in the container called computers, which we talked about earlier. So far, we've only talked about managing users OU, but now we're talking about computers. And you can see here, we can see that it's servers, some laptops, and PCs. So there's LPT, laptop, PCs, and servers are all in here, right? Having all of our devices there is not the best idea, since it's very, very likely that you want different policies for your servers than you do for your PCs. Makes sense, right? You don't usually want a server to have the same policy as a computer. Now, you might even break it down even more and say laptops are usually for work from home, so we need laptops to be able to RDP, and we don't want PCs to be able to RDP because they're sitting in the office. So you can start breaking out policies that way. Now, you have workstations, you have servers, and then you have domain controllers. They're saying, if you look here under users, they actually created, looks like they created it. Yep, workstations and servers. So we'll go ahead and go in here. And this is where the machine starts getting really slow. So just bear with me here. You can see I'm struggling to even get it to click anything. And it's taking forever. So we'll do it here. Come on. All right, so we're going to say new OU, and we're going to name this workstations. Hit OK. And there's workstations. So now what we do is we take all the workstations, which is this one, 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 and we're going to drag them down into workstations. Yes. Now all these workstations we can actually manage separately, meaning we know they're all the workstations. We need to manage them separately. So now we can actually assign policies to this workstation OU, and we don't have to do it individually. So that's where the really nice administrative overhead comes into play. So after organizing the available computers, how many end up in workstation? There's 7. And then is it recommendable to create separate OUs for servers and workstations? Yes. There's very few instances where there are times where you might have a server or a workstation in a server OU, but that's not the point. Typically, you don't do that. So now we're going to go to group policy management. So this is also part of Active Directory. Again, this Active Directory users and computers is ADUC. Active Directory, that's what Active Directory users and computers is. The server itself is called domain controller. And then this is group policy management. So this is where you configure GPOs or group policy objects. And you can see GPOs are simply a collection of settings that can be applied to an OU. So this is where we actually manage the settings we're going to handle and apply them. So if you see here, we go in here to group policy and look at that. There's our, right there, there's our domain, tryhackme.local, and then there's our workstations, and there's our Tryhackme domain. So we can actually look in the workstations, and you notice it's not going to give us anybody. It's going to tell us, hey, there is no policies applied to this. So we could actually go in here, and we could say, hey, we want to create a GPO or a group policy object. So if we created one, let's just say test. Doesn't really matter. George, stop. My dog just saw a squirrel outside. All right, so we do test, right? So you notice it says enforced. No, it's not enforced yet because we're still testing it, right? So we'll edit it. And this is just a better way of seeing it than the way they did it, in my opinion. But we can look. So you can see we have different ones. We have computer configurations, and since these are, if we go down, yep, and of course, since these are workstations, that's what I want. I want the computer configurations, not the actual user configurations. So we'll go to all these and kind of just take a look. And you can see, for instance, control panel, which is the example they give us below, but they do it under users. So we'll go to control panel and we'll look at them. All right, so user accounts, apply the default account picture to all users. That's one setting you could do. So we could say, hey, this is where we want all the accounts to have this picture, right? That's under the control panel. Now, if we go to this, you can see we could create one, or we could say settings page visibility. We could change all these policies. Now, the ones they show us is if we go to users, you'll notice the same thing. So if we go to policies, there's administrative templates. And then here's control panel, but you'll notice there's one called right here. Man, this thing's slow. It is prohibit access to control panel. So you can prohibit the access of control panel to users. Okay. So we could take this, we could edit it, and we could apply it, and then we just drag it to the OU. But because we already created this test one, we're going to do something with the actual, workstations, because it's showing you the user one. I want to show you a workstation one. So here's the workstation one. Let's just say device installation. Okay. So you can see prevent creation of system restore point, allow remote access to the plug and play, turn off found new hardware, do not send error reports, specify each search order, blah, blah. Okay. Let's try and find one that's less complex so that we can just show something easy. But this thing is so slow, it's hard to even control. Okay, so software installation. Okay, so that would be specific software that you installed. Man, this thing is like, I'm clicking stuff and it's not responding, so I think it doesn't do it, and then I go off of it. Okay, so we'll just go with system for now, and we'll look at and see if we can find something easy. Okay, log on right there. We'll do that one. So you can see allow users to select when a password is required when resuming from connected standby. Turn on convenience PIN sign in. So perfect example. Let's say you want people to be able to sign on with a PIN. You can select this one or turn off picture password sign in. Let's see if we can find one that we can turn off the Windows startup sound, for instance, right? Let's say we don't want people to hear that and we only don't want the workstations to hear it, right? That's a silly one, but it's something that you could turn off, right? And then you would turn this on, and then that would be under this GPO, right? And you could add multiple things to this GPO. And then everything in the workstations follows this security practice. So you build your security based on the workstation, and then you build it based on the users. So now they work together. So for instance, one thing that I know most companies will turn off is they'll turn off that you can't open PowerShell, right? That's something that, now some companies won't do that, but so they might have all their regular users not be able to open PowerShell. The point of that is obvious, right? A regular user has no reason to open PowerShell. It can cause problems, but that's something they can control in the GPOs. So then here you see they had us show you, they had us go through, and they did the password policy. So the password policy is down here, and you can see under users, and they go through here and they say the password policy, and you can see here it is, enforce password history, 24 passwords remembered, blah, blah, blah. You can change all that. Now, I will say Windows password policy isn't super strict by default, but you can change all that. And that's the point. So you guys can follow this and go through it and change the minimum password length to 10 characters. I'm not going to do it because this machine is so slow that I've tried doing this stuff, and it just takes so long to actually get anything to happen on this machine. That's driving me nuts. So you can see here's a big thing. Any help desk, any sysad probably knows this command by heart, GP update force. And the reason for it is because every time anything changes, if somebody tries to log into a machine and something's not right, typically this fixes it. And what it is the group policy updater never worked. So there might be a change and something didn't work. So it doesn't know how to talk. And if it can't understand the group policy, it's not going to work. So anytime you make a change, you need to update the group policy. And this means on the individual's machine, you have to do this. Now, usually when you restart a machine and log back in, it does this, but sometimes it won't. And then you have to force it. That's what's happening. So one other thing to notice is GPOs are distributed on the network via a network share called sys volume. Okay, so that's important because it's stored on the DC, and that's where everybody gets their policy. And you can see, okay, so they actually changed the auto lock GPO as well. So they said interactive login machine inactivity limit is 300 seconds. So if after 300 seconds you're not touching your machine, it turns off. You might change that to 50 seconds, might be 20 seconds. Depends on how strict you want to be with it. But there's a lot of companies that might be more strict because they have confidential information, things like that. So that's where your policy reference or is key to how you run your organization. Now, you can see once the GPOs have been applied to the correct, we can log in as any users in either marketing, sales, or management because they set up an RDP policy with those users. Again, I'm not going to do it because I was having issues even getting it to keep doing stuff. It's starting to slow down again. So what's the name of the network share that's used to distribute GPOs? Sysvol, if you remember. And if you guys want to do this, they literally walk you through it. It's super easy. If you can change one group policy in here, you can change them all. It's just finding the one you want. So for people that are saying, well, you didn't do it, correct, I didn't do it because I showed you guys how to do other ones. And the reason I showed you other ones is because I don't want you to think that these are the only ones you can change. And they showed different ones here, but you can go through and mess with it yourself. Set up your own group policy. That's a huge thing you should learn how to do. I actually, when I taught Cyber Patriot, I think it was called, or Cyber Shield, I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, it's a program for high school kids I taught years ago, and that was something that they had to do. They had to change the group policy to be secure. So can a GPO be used to apply settings to users and computers? Yes, that's the whole point. All right, now we're breaking into authentication methods used by domain controllers. I'm just going to switch to this so you don't get distracted. So the users, this is how Kerberos works, okay? So Kerberos, my dog just sat down. So Kerberos, this is how it works, okay? So you have Kerberos basically is a ticket granting service. You can see it says key distribution center. That's the hub. That's where everything's going to go. So that's usually the domain controller. So you're going to go in the client. You have the user hash. The client requests a ticket granting, a TGT, a ticket granting ticket, okay? So they send the username and the timestamp. They send it to the, and they do this by using the user hash to encrypt it. The domain controller looks at it, says, okay, the user hash is good. The ticket granting ticket hash. Here it is. And they send you over the ticket granting ticket and a session key. Okay. Now you don't have access to anything yet. This is just setting you up for success. From there, you go to a server and you say, hey, I want to access this file server, right? And mind you, this all happens in milliseconds. You're not seeing this. So you have your session key that it sent you before and your ticket grading ticket that it sent you before. And now you say, hey, here's my username, my timestamp, and the ticket you gave me earlier. And you say, here's the server I want to access. Okay, this is the MySQL server. Now it looks and validates that you have permissions to access that. If you do, it says, hey, yes, here's your ticket granting service, and then here's your service session key. So here is your temporary access. It might be you have access for, an hour. You might have access. It depends on how it's set up, but it's going to give you access, right? Now you take that and you give that to the server. Say, hey, look, I've already got my username, my timestamp, and my ticket granting service, and now I want access to the server. And it says, yep, cool. You're valid. You got everything you need. And the reason it knows that is because it's actually this ticket granting service and the service itself is actually encrypted with the owner's hash. So the reason this sounds complex, it's really not that complex, but the reason all these steps are in place is because the encryption is based on the service, the user, the ticket. So it changes the encryption and doesn't allow it to just be like one encryption standard that you can then crack one encryption and then you're in. Because it's using different hashes each time, so it'll change. So the other thing with this is if you ever heard of a golden ticket attack, this is what they're talking about. Is there are times where it's an attack that you can get the domain controller to give you a golden ticket, and what it is it's free access to everything. That attack is still around, but that's not the point of this box. So now NetNTLM authentication, this is older. This isn't in use anymore. But what this does is basically you can see it says the client sends an authentication request to the server. The server generates a random number and then sends it as a challenge to the client. So then the client combines their NTLM password hash, which NTLM passwords shouldn't be in use anymore, hopefully. At least not in this facet. Password hash with the challenge and other known data, blah, 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 to generate a response to the challenge and sends it back to the server for verification. So you send them a request, they send you a challenge to basically validate it's you. You get that, you send it all back. The server forwards the challenge to the domain controller. So in this case, the server does it and then sends it to the domain controller. In Kerberos, you're doing it and sending it to the domain controller before you contact the server. So you can see the differences. So that's one of the kind of key differences here. Obviously, the process is different too. The domain controller uses the challenge to recalculate and compare and make sure that the original response from you, basically the original request, was actually you and that somebody didn't try and say they're you. That's what they do. You can read it. This isn't really in use anymore, so I'm not going to cover it too much. When I say it's not in use, everything that's outdated is still in use somewhere, but I'm saying people aren't going forward trying to use this. Will a current version of Windows NetNTLM as the preferred authentication method? No. So nay. So it is not. The current version will not. When referring to Kerberos, what type of ticket allows us to request further tickets? That's a ticket granting ticket. And when using NTLM, is a user's password transmitted over the network at any point? No. That's the other difference here is they never send the password over the wire at all. So now, finally, we're going to cover domains, forests, trees, trusts. Okay, so here's your domain, right? Tryhackme.local. You have your domain controller, your PCs, your servers, your people. That's all a domain, right? Now, let's say you buy a company in the UK or you start a company in the UK. Well, you still have the Tryhackme.local, right? But now you have Tryhackme.local. Then you have the UK, then you have the US. These are managed differently because in Europe, there is GDPR, right? Global Data Protection Regulation. So you might have to change how you do security over there. So you have this managed separately. They can still talk to each other because they're under the same parent domain as long as there's trusts built in there. But the US is managed separately, meaning when I open up our ADUC, you're going to see the UK one and the US one, and they're managed separately so that we can apply different policies to whatever we need them for. Now you have forests. Forests are multiple trees. So this is a tree, right? Because you can see we have the UK, we have the US, and then the parent. These are a tree. Now, the forest is multiple trees put together. So now let's say we bought a totally different company, but we own them both, but we need them. There might be a time where this company over here and this company over here need to talk to each other, right? What if, the director of this company and the director of this company need to talk to each other because they are, they're literally owned by the same parent company. They just need to talk, right? I need access to your files. You need access to mine, whatever. This is where a forest trust is built, okay? So this is where you take this tree and you have a trust built where they can talk to each other. And this is all managed under one umbrella. That's the whole point. So now you have trust relationships. So there's two types of trust relationships. There is one-way trust relationships, and this is counterintuitive to what you think. So domain AAA trusts domain BBB, meaning, hey, I trust you, right? That's the way to think about it. Like, you have a friend, I trust him, so he has access. So for instance, in my house, right, I trust my friend, so he has a key, he can come into my house. But that doesn't necessarily mean that my friend gave me a key to his house, right? So that's a one-way trust, meaning they can access my stuff. Maybe they have to pull files every week or something like that for a report, something. And then there's a two-way trust, which is exactly what it sounds like. We have access to each other's stuff because we trust each other. So it's not uncommon for either of those. So just know the difference. What is a group of Windows domains that share the same namespace? That is a tree. So the namespace was thm.local. And then you notice this one is MHT. They have a totally different namespace. Now, what should be configured between two domains for a user in domain A to access a resource in domain B? And that's a trust relationship. You have to have that trust, or else we can't talk to each other. It's the same reason if I work for Google, I can't just log in and start accessing Yahoo's internal stuff, right? We don't have that trust. We don't have that sitting there, right? So now in the conclusion, that's Active Directory, guys. Very basics. We're going to keep going through this path and try and cover it all, because this is where people miss so much stuff. You don't get hands-on experience with Active Directory, and you're missing how the entire brain of the operation works. And this is why people expect years of experience before you get into a job, not just because of Active Directory, but Active Directory is one of many pieces that experience that you're not getting when you skip straight to the security piece. So let me know what you guys think. Hopefully you guys like this content. And if you do, hit that like button. Let's get this thing going. Let's get 5K. Let's go, guys. Thank you so much.